Story 1. This happened when I was 6 years old. I'm nearly 50 now, so my memory's a little hazy. I had a friend the same age as me named Kelly. We used to hang out together with other children who lived in our block and local area. One afternoon, Kelly knocked on my door. I answered and she asked if I could go to the corner shop with her to get some bananas so that we could make a milkshake. Before I could answer, my stepmother called down the stairs to say I had to clean my room and was not going anywhere. Kelly shrugged and said she was going anyway. That was the last I saw of her. Early evening came, and Kelly's mother had knocked on every door looking for her. All of the dads got together and went looking for her. It got later and later, and when I went to bed, she had still not been found. In the early hours of the morning, I heard a noise outside my bedroom window, a kind of intermittent moaning. When I looked out, I saw a policeman sitting on the wall, sobbing and being comforted by another policeman. I watched for a while and then went downstairs. My dad told me Kelly had been found dead in the copse in front of our block. I later found out Kelly had been murdered by one of the older boys who hung out with us. I had to give a statement as I had seen Kelly the day before. Later, police feedback revealed that Kelly had been killed hours before she knocked on my door and that my recollection of events was impossible. The man who owned the corner shop said Kelly had never come in to buy bananas. I'm pretty sure the police thought I was lying and that my mother was either lying as well or mistaken about what she'd heard. From that time onwards, I have believed that Kelly came to visit one more time before she left for good. And since then, the idea of the paranormal has just seemed normal. Story 2. My childhood home is haunted. Where our house stands, there used to be another house. It burned down, and the father of the family who lived there died in the basement during the fire. The family sold the land, and a new house was built over the old basement. My grandmother, who lives in the same town, knows the family. My parents bought the new house when I was a toddler, and we've lived there for about 20 years. The ghost of the man who died in the fire, named Charlie, lives in our house, and his presence is quite obvious. Here are some of our experiences. 1. My mom says that once, when she and my dad were arguing, she took to the bedroom to cool off. She said, "Charlie, I wish you could knock some sense into him." Not 5 minutes later, my dad started swearing from the living room. The shelves above his chair had fallen and knocked him on the head. They've never fallen before or since. 2. Any animal we have, a couple of dogs when I was a kid, my cat now, will stare down the hallway for long stretches of time, then go bananas chasing something from the living room at one end to the bedrooms at the other, as if they're playing with someone. I personally have heard footsteps, big heavy footsteps, like someone wearing work boots, walk up and down the hallway, especially at night. It scared me as a kid, but now I just take it as Charlie checking on our safety. 4. My grandmother, while visiting us once, woke up in the guest bedroom to a shadow man standing in the doorway. She hid under the blanket for a few minutes, then decided it was safe. When she came out from under the blanket, the shadow man was at her bedside, leaning over her. She hid under the blanket again until she fell asleep. The most concrete evidence for me was the time Charlie scared something off. My bedroom was always the coldest room in the house, and often I felt uncomfortable in there, like I was sitting next to someone who disliked me. One day I went to grab clothes for a shower and walked right into a wall of evil halfway down the hall. I can't describe it fully. Nothing looked different. I just felt like I had physically crossed a barrier into a force field of hatred. I knew without a doubt that I was in danger, and without thinking, I ran to the opposite end of the house, to the kitchen. I stood at the stove, shaking. I was about 14, afraid to look down the hallway in case I saw whatever was down there, but afraid that if I didn't look, it would sneak up on me. I eventually convinced myself that I was being a baby and started slowly moving through the dining room and towards the hall, afraid. Story 3. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend called Mr. Johnson. I would talk to and play with him all day, and my parents mostly ignored it because it seemed harmless. One day while my mom was out watering the yard, a neighbor walked by and started a conversation. He said he was surprised that we had moved in there because the house was supposedly haunted. The previous tenant had died in the house, and his name was Mr. Johnson. After that, my parents got really uncomfortable when I talk about my friend, and I eventually stopped interacting with him. I also have a very vivid memory of talking to something on a curtain rod in the same house. I can't remember what we were talking about, only that its voice was kind of raspy and weird. When my dad came in and asked what I was doing, I remember the thing saying, "Say I'm God." So, I told my dad I was talking to God and thought the freaked out look he gave me was hilarious, even though I had no real understanding of what God was or why that was such a strange thing to say. Story 4, I once got a job to install a security system in an old house. The family that had moved in there had a little boy, about 5 years old. The boy was playing around by himself, and he would sometimes ask random questions that seemed directed at me. I answered one of his questions, and I remember him telling me, "Oh, sorry, I was just talking to my friend." The mother poked her head in and told me that he had found a new friend since they moved in. She then leaned in closer and jokingly said, "It's actually kind of creepy." Later that day, the boy was in the kitchen playing and trying to reach a bag of chips on top of their fridge. I told him he should probably get down off the counter and that I could get them down for him. He got down and said, "Oh, my friend will get it." I just kind of shrugged it off and went back to working on running the cable through the wall. All of a sudden, the bag of chips exploded on the floor. I turned around thinking the kid must have gotten back on the counter, but instead he was on the floor picking up the chips. He gave me a look and said, "My friend accidentally knocked them off." I asked the boy where his friend was now, and he pointed on top of the fridge and said, "He is right up there smiling at you." I never got such a freaky chill in my life. Story 5, I worked at the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose for a while. Because I wasn't driving yet, I took the bus regularly to work. This bus usually dropped me off excessively early, like 7 a.m. for my 8 a.m. shift. Sometimes I would meet up with the key holders for the house and help open it, turning on lights and opening doors and such. On one of these occasions, I ran into a man in white overalls in one of the rooms. I said good morning and went about my way. He nodded and said good morning with a really thick accent. German, I think. No big deal. Sometimes there are workers who show up early to retouch some part or another of the house. I hadn't seen this guy around, but I thought he might be new. I mentioned it to the key holder when I saw him in one of the offices. He took me to one of the workmen's sheds and pointed to a picture on the wall. Lo and behold, there was the workman with about 7 other people. The photo was dated 1908. The tour guides named him Clyde. Stuff like that wasn't a daily occurrence, but happened regularly enough, particularly in the early mornings. I got used to being respectful of the house and whatever inhabitants lived there. So much so that when I put in my 2 weeks' notice, I got a gift from Mrs. Winchester. She played the piano for me. I loved that house, and it broke my heart to leave it. Story 6. When I was about 20, I worked for a carpet cleaning service. It was really just me and the 2 other guys who started it. I eventually proved myself, and they gave me a van and my own clients to work with. One morning, I headed up into the rural Tennessee hills to do a job. It was a private house. I spoke with a middle-aged woman who owned it and began my process, pulling out the machine, hooking up to a water source, etc. As I made my way through the house, I noticed that the woman I spoke with was hanging out in the kitchen, and her husband was doing work in the garage and out front. There were no other signs of people in the house. I was making my way down the main hallway, straight into what I assumed was the master bedroom. As I pushed the machine into the room, watching what I was doing on the floor, I saw an older woman out of the corner of my eye. She was wearing a white gown, standing up out of a chair in the far right corner of the room. I looked up to apologize, and I saw her briskly walk around an alcove where this chair was. I couldn't see the right wall of this alcove, so I assumed it was an exit, and she was simply leaving so I could finish. I continued and made my way to the alcove. As I turned into it, I saw that it was a closet with the door ajar and the light off. My heart sank, and I half-assed the rest of that job and booked it out of there. It never felt aggressive or anything. Peaceful, actually. Just an old soul hanging out, I guess. 15 years later, and it's still so vivid in my mind. Story 7. The reason I believe in the supernatural is because of a traumatic experience I had as a kid. It was Easter Sunday, and my parents had set up an Easter egg hunt in the house for my brother and me. The eggs were hidden all over the house, and my parents had put $1 coins in each of them. They were even in their bedroom, our bedrooms, bathrooms, etc. My parents put us on a timer, saying anything we didn't find, after 30 minutes they would take back. My brother and I decided that when the timer started, we would book it to their bedroom because it was the furthest room from us, and we would work our way back. So when our parents started the timer, we ran up to their bedroom and into their bathroom. We scoured the shower, under the sink, etc. Then I shut the door because there was a shelf hidden behind it when open. There was an egg there, and we grabbed it, but the door locked behind us. My brother and I immediately panicked and tried to open the door. We started banging on it and yelling that our parents were cheating and had done it on purpose. We were just playing around, and it was all giggles and fun. Then the room started shaking. I immediately got freaked out. I was only 8 or 9 at the time, and my brother was 5 or 6. He was just kind of confused about why it was shaking. The blinds in the bathroom were shaking, and the windows started flashing with really bright lights outside. I thought we were going to die. I started screaming and crying immediately and banging on the door for real now. Finally, after about 10 seconds, my thoughts turned to keeping my brother safe. I opened up the cabinet door and started trying to shove him in there because I remembered my teacher telling us about getting something to protect our heads if we had an earthquake. There was a really loud noise outside, like a lot of wind, and this really deep noise, like something coming towards us. My brother was too big to get fully in the cabinet, but I sat down against it to try and hold the door shut. I covered my head, closed my eyes, and thought we were going to die. Then the bathroom door opened and all of it stopped. My mom was looking super confused at me when I opened my eyes. I immediately jumped on her and hugged her and cried, yelling that it was an earthquake because that was the only explanation I had. My brother was stuck in the cabinet, and she immediately freaked out and yelled for my dad, who ran upstairs. My mom sat me on my bed and got my brother out, and he was crying and scared too. I told her what happened. She probably would have thought I was nuts, but my brother confirmed the lights, the shaking, and the scary noise. She and my dad had absolutely no explanation for this, and she said they didn't hear us or any noise. They only came upstairs because there were about 5 minutes left on the timer, and they thought something was wrong if we were still upstairs looking for eggs, or they would be nice and give us a hint to go downstairs. About a week later, I told my neighbor about it. He was one of my favorite people because he was super funny and let us ride our bikes up his big driveway. When I told him about it, he immediately looked freaked out. He said that a long time ago, probably about 10 years ago, there was a bad plane crash in that neighborhood. I rode my bike back home and told my mom. She freaked out too and looked it up. And it was true. Since then, I've believed in that supernatural stuff. Story 8, I remember when I was 9 years old, I used to hang these paper chains in my room. I would just hang up pieces of paper on a wall, like decorations. One day I was playing in the room and looked at my shadow. For some reason, it seemed a little off. Then the shadow proceeded to stretch up, or stand up. It's hard to describe. And a hand reached up and knocked one of the papers off the wall. It was taped up there pretty well. I remember freaking out and just bolting out of there into my grandma's room. Over time, I got over that incident. But then, 8 years later, I remember telling my dad the story as a joke because I thought he would laugh. His response was, "Oh yeah, you mean shadow people?" "Yeah, our family always sees that, especially the oldest in each family. I've seen it, my dad has seen it, my mom has seen it, and her mom, etc. By the way, they are the oldest siblings in their family, as am I. I was scared, of course, but thought he was messing with me again. So I called my grandpa and grandma literally 10 minutes later to ask about shadow people. They proceeded to tell me all these stories about being followed and even scarier experiences than what I'd gone through. It honestly freaked me out, and since then, I try to look away from my shadow. Also, my grandma has a lot of shadow people stories, but refuses to tell me because, as she's told me, I'm very sensitive and wouldn't be able to handle it. She's not wrong. Story 9, I thought that I struck and killed a girl that wasn't there. I was driving home late at night from a double shift, so admittedly, I was tired. I had my radio blaring to keep awake as I drove through the backwoods on a road that I had learned to take as an occasional shortcut. During the day, the road was busy and congested, but at night it was always empty, save for a stray deer or raccoon. I'm driving, jamming out, and admittedly speeding. I take a corner too quickly, and there in front of me was a young girl, about 19 or 20, with long dark hair wearing jeans and a light-colored blouse. For a split second, I saw her eyes reflected in the headlights, saw the look of shock and fear on her face, and I swerved hard off the road and into a ditch. There was no way that I didn't hit her. I jumped out of the car and started walking back to the spot I had last seen her. I flagged down a passing car to tell them to call 911. This was in the days before everyone had cell phones. Cops came, EMTs came, and there was no one. No body, no girl, and I was given a sobriety test on the spot. I got home much later than I should have, and my wife was waiting for me as I hadn't arrived on time. I'm shaken as I can still see the girl's face in my head, and I recount the story to my wife, who goes white. She runs upstairs and grabs a yearbook, telling me to flip through the senior pictures. Page 3, there she is, looking exactly as I had seen and described her. I ask my wife if she knows the girl, or if she has her or her family's number. That's when my wife informs me that the girl died 3 years prior during a hit and run around that exact curve. I wasn't from the area, there were no ghost stories involving that road, and I had no way of knowing that the girl I picked out of a lineup of seniors was already dead. To this day, I still wonder what happened. Was I tired? Had I heard her name or seen her face on a memorial newscast or clipping and not registered it? Or had I actually encountered what to this very moment I still consider the most terrifying event in my life, as I honest to God thought I was going to jail? I'm not 100% positive, but I can say this. I can still see her face lit up by my headlights, clear as a goddamn bell. Story 10. I worked as a carer in Sheffield, UK. I'd been in care for well over a year at this point, so I was pretty well trained and used to the work. In this job, you see people die, or people who have died, and often a carer is the first to know. So death isn't anything I was particularly scared of, as it's a natural course of life. Our company started a new care package for a lady. We were a big company at the time, so we had lots of carers and clients, which sadly meant the same carers didn't necessarily see the same clients day in and day out. But with new management, they were trying to change this and get some continuity to the care. I'd only ever been to this lady's house a couple times a week, usually in the morning or at lunch. I'd been rostered on for the whole week, all 4 visits, morning, lunch, tea, bed. The morning went well. Everything was fine. Her house was lovely, albeit a bit too big for her, seeing as she lived in the living room and kitchen. Her bed was downstairs, as was a commode, which we emptied upstairs in one of the bathrooms. On a routine bed call for this lady, we would wash her, help her use the commode, make her a cup of tea, get her into her nightie, and put her to bed. After everything was done, we made sure to empty the commode upstairs. As I went through the living room, I noticed a basement under the stairs, and the door was unlocked and slightly open. I wouldn't think anything of it, but this lady lives alone, can't walk without help, and doesn't have any family to visit her. All her friends have sadly passed away. I'm the only person she has seen all day, as I've been on her rota for the entire day. I shut the door and lock it with the bolt, then continue through the hall to get up the stairs. It's pitch black because it's winter and it's dark at 6 p.m. I switch the lights on as I go. I stop at the first step and look to the top. It's weird. I start to feel a pricking in the air, almost like static, and I have a sense of impending doom in the pit of my stomach. I have to go up because the commode needs emptying, so I run up the stairs, trying hard not to spill the commode, and head straight to the end of the hall and into the bathroom. I empty it out, turn the light off, and shut the door. Once I shut it, I heard a thud, almost like a body falling. Thinking the worst, I run downstairs to make sure the lady hasn't fallen out of bed. She hadn't, but her armchair had moved closer to the bed, almost blocking the door to the kitchen. I'm 100% sure I locked that door when I came in. I always do, so no one can come in. I moved the chair back to where it was, and it was almost like there was something shoving it. It was difficult to move, but it's never usually like this. The lady turns to me and says, "Oh, no, dear, you can leave it there. Harold likes to sit there." I just sort of stopped, not thinking I heard her right. I know her husband was called Harold, so I left it as she said and rather quickly made my way out of the house. When locking the door, I distinctly heard a male voice and the lady laughing, I never went back to that house. Story 11. I used to work at a movie theater, and there was a lot of weird stuff that happened there. I was a manager, so I had to close down the theater often at 3 a.m. and was one of the only ones who could access different parts of the theater for safety reasons, such as the ceilings above the auditoriums to change lights. One night, I was the only manager on duty and the only one with access to a catwalk above the lobby ceiling. This catwalk has most of the server equipment for the television displays of ticket times. One day, the whole system just got buggy and turned off. I ran up there to try to reset it and noticed the box that powered the TVs was unplugged. Note, I'm the only one with keys and thus access to this room. So obviously, I looked for foul play, thinking someone had broken in to mess with me. Lots of pranksters work at the theater, and we had a lot of fun. But all available hiding spots were empty, and I was alone. Another night, a fellow manager and I were closing the theater on a super busy Saturday night. I think it was one of the Hobbit movies. The theater was locked and no customers were inside. I was walking around turning off everything in a breaker room when I thought I heard running outside. I assumed my coworker was finished upstairs. I radioed him to turn off games while he's down here, and he radioed back, "All right, man, I'm almost finished upstairs." That freaked me out because we've had cases where people try to sneak into the theater at night. I burst through the door and thought I saw a girl's foot zooming into one of the theaters. I asked him if he had turned off the lights in Theater 3, the one the girl went into, and he said he had. Assuming the girl couldn't see and would have a hard time hiding, I told him to leave the lights off and shine a booth light to look for her. He radioed me. "I see her laying down in the middle top row," so I told him to flick on the lights, and I stormed in there ready to yell at her. I got to the row, and there was no one there. I looked around and realized I'd been played, so I radioed up to the booth. "Haha, you got me." But as I looked up, I saw him in the booth window, jaw dropped. This sent a chill down my spine because I've had to fight off drugged-up people in the lobby and theaters before. And for some reason, I felt like I was about to be attacked. I whipped around preparing for scratches and biting, but there was no one there. He radioed me, "Dude, what the fuck's him?" I asked what happened, and he was too shaken to answer, so I asked him where she went, and he was pointing at the screen. I ran over and opened it up so I could get behind there to drag this girl out. I kept saying I was about to call the police if she didn't hurry up and get out, but as I got behind there was nothing. I heard, "Did you get her?" from my coworker on the walkie, and I told him she wasn't there and asked if he was sure. Then when I looked out into the auditorium and at the exit doors, I saw her, naked as all hell but pale, grossly pale and just standing in the doorway. I looked away to get my leg over the front of the screen room, and she was now about 20 feet closer. Now I could see more of her, and I still remember how there was just this naked girl standing there. I shouted at her, and she flinched and bolted, and I immediately followed. I was gaining on her when she turned the corner into an empty hallway, and as I rounded it, she was gone. Poof! I immediately went to the cameras and checked the footage to see where she went, and literally the only thing I see in the hallway camera was me running out of the auditorium and stopping in disbelief. No lady, nothing, just me. I sat there in disbelief for about 5 minutes until my coworker said, "I'm too scared to come down alone," and we closed up shop together. Story 12. The tipping point was seeing a large ball of light floating in my living room. There was no logical explanation for it. Before that, there were other strange occurrences. It started with a few one-piece figures I had. Every morning they would be in different positions. At first I assumed my brother was pranking me, but he insisted it wasn't him. Given my light sleep and the creaky stairs leading to his room, it would have been nearly impossible for him to do it without me noticing. Even when he slept over at a friend's place, the figures would still move. Then came the footsteps. From my desk, I could see the corridor leading to the only other room in the house. There was no way anyone could walk around without me hearing them at night. Yet I heard footsteps in the corridor when my room was open and no one else was there. This happened multiple nights in a row, and I started to feel creeped out, even though I didn't believe in ghosts. Next, objects that had been sitting on my shelves for years began falling on me. Finally, one night, I got up to get a snack in the kitchen and saw a large ball of light floating there. It was kind of transparent, about a meter in diameter, with tiny flecks of light dancing around it. I couldn't deny it anymore. My reaction was to hide in my room, and it was gone by morning. That's when I started researching what it could be. Since then, I've also heard a lot of footsteps and muffled voices in my living room. When I went to investigate, the sound stopped abruptly, and the room felt unsettling, like I should leave immediately. As soon as I stepped back into the corridor, the voices resumed. It felt like I had interrupted a conversation. Once, while on a tour of underground galleries in an old medieval town, I was trailing behind the group. As we turned a corner, I saw a woman in white standing behind us. It felt peaceful, unlike the usual fear I experience in such situations. Obviously, the first major encounter changed my worldview significantly. I used to be a firm believer that paranormal stuff was nonsense. Now I don't care what people think. I know what I saw, heard, and felt, and I want to learn as much as I can about it to keep myself safe. Story 13. I have a few encounters that I believe involve something mimicking my mom. One night, I was sitting on the couch with my dog watching TV at around 10:30 p.m. Suddenly, I heard my mom calling from her bedroom, which is across the hallway from the stairs leading to the back door. She said, "Come here and let the dog out." I found it odd because the dog was with me. I didn't think much of it and tried to get the dog to move, but she wouldn't budge. Just as I was about to reply, I noticed the orange streetlight outside illuminating the empty driveway. Another time, when I was still in high school, my best friend and I were on the bus heading home. My friend pointed out a silver car pulled over on the side of the road. A familiar-looking decal was hanging from the rearview mirror, and a woman was inside wearing a dark blue jacket with short, curly brown hair. She asked me if that was my mom. We both laughed because my mom is known for sitting in our driveway for up to 20 minutes on her phone before coming inside. However, when the bus passed by my house, we noticed my mom's car was blocked in between my dad's truck and my brother's cars. One day I was leaving my room to make lunch when I heard my mom calling me from downstairs. At first I didn't hear her, so I moved closer to the steps and called back to her. She sounded off and asked me to come down and help her with the laundry, something she would never do. Just as I was about to place my foot on the top step, I remembered my mom telling me she would be home later in the evening. Story 14. My parents went out to eat late one night, around 11 to 12, and I was home with my sister and grandma. My grandma and sister were asleep beside me, while I was up watching TV and playing on my PSP. Suddenly, I heard the door lock shuffle and open, which I assumed was my parents returning. I continued playing on my PSP. Then I heard the door close and saw the light of my living room turn on. After a minute, I heard no sound. I expected to hear my parents talking, so I looked up again towards my door and saw the light still on. My room was on the left side of the hallway, and my parents' room was further down the hallway beside me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps coming towards my room, and I got a really nervous feeling. The footsteps were heavy like an intruder. I stared at my door and hallway wall, and I saw the shadow of a man. He had medium hair combed to the side like a businessman, a small pointy nose, a nice jawline, and a skinny body. I only saw the shadow go from right to left on the hallway wall in front of my door. I stayed put, and it was quiet. I stood still in my bed for about 4 minutes before getting up to see what was happening. I looked down the hallway to my left and saw no one. I went to my parents' room and saw no one, and I also checked the bathroom. I was really spooked out and went back to my room and hid in my blanket with my sister and grandma. I later told my mom about this experience, and she told me I probably saw the man who died in the house. She told me that before my dad and her rented the house, the landlord told her a guy died there and was haunted by him. Once she told me this, everything clicked. I also heard knocks coming from the attic that was in the hallway ceiling, which would wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was convinced that it was the guy I saw the shadow of, up there. Story 15. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was taking on odd jobs alongside my retail job. One of the odd jobs I decided to take was a ghost tour guide in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The particular company I was working for did those ghost investigation type tours where you go out with equipment and ask questions to try to get reactions from the ghosts. One night in particular made me quit for good. I took a huge group of people out, around 25 to 30 people total. Since it was so big, another guide accompanied me and we split the group. We would go to the area we were investigating and split the group among the different investigation areas. Everything was going rather well and we had a very diverse group. We were using a ghost box, which basically plays FM signals backward so you can hear EVP. We were in a circle asking questions individually when someone asked if anyone was there, and we heard a very clear hello. Obviously, we were spooked, but we figured someone was messing with the group. Then we started hearing full sentences, clearly being formed by a static coming out of the ghost box. One sentence said, "I will hurt Super Subwoofer if he leaves." Then the voice began repeating, "Justin cannot leave. Justin cannot leave. Justin cannot leave." I turned off the device, decided we were in Gettysburg, not Amityville, and switched places with the other group. As we were walking to the next spot, the kid who asked what the voice said came up to me and said, "Can I stay by you? I'm not really comfortable anymore." I understood why he'd be freaked out, but I asked him what was going on. Then he looked at me with a worried face and said, "My name is Justin. I haven't told anyone that here." I had been present with this portion of the group the whole night and could verify that I hadn't heard him tell anyone that. After the tour, I took my cut of the tour, plus the tips I received. I called my boss and told her that I would not be doing any more ghost tours. For nights on end, I could not sleep without thinking about the voice. I also have an analog record that I and a few friends did out there and have yet to listen to it. That's a big old nope for me. Story 16. My sister and her husband bought the oldest house in their small town, built in the 1700s. During the Civil War, it was converted into a makeshift hospital. The room I'd stay in when I'd visit was where a few soldiers had succumbed to their injuries. I distinctly remember seeing a dark figure pacing in the room, eventually disappearing as if to go upstairs. On a trip to Gettysburg, my sister, her husband, and I visited the battlefields. We were walking around, and it was almost dusk, so the battlefields would be closing shortly. We wanted to walk up Little Round Top, small hill with a great view. We started up it, and my brother-in-law checked his watch for the time. We walked for what felt like hours, which was weird because it's not a long walk. We finally reached the top, and he checked his watch again, because we were curious how long the walk took, as it felt like forever. The watch displayed a time that was a few hours before the time when we left. This is something that I've heard many people experience there. On the same trip, another night we were walking back from a late dinner. Our hotel was near the battlefields, so we cut through to save time. We saw a man in Civil War uniform, which is not uncommon in Gettysburg. We passed him, said a friendly, "Hello," and he nodded. Something felt off, so we turned around, and that man was gone. We still didn't think too much of it. We got to the hotel, went to bed, and I woke up the next morning with scratches up and down my arms and back. They were in clusters of 3 lines, sort of like claws. There was no explanation for this to this day. On the same trip, we were out at dusk again on the battlefields, this time at Triangular Field, said to be the most haunted field. I was snapping pics on my digital camera, of course, trying flash on and off. I snapped a few with my brother-in-law out in front of me. In the first pic, there was him and a small mist or something in the corner. In the second pic, the mist was coming into frame more. In the third pic, there was just this mist, and I went to take a fourth pic, and my camera was busted. I spent a while trying to figure it out, turning it on and off, etc. Finally, I got it to snap one last pic, taken from the middle of the field looking back towards the entrance. It's probably the best pic I have of these types of things. A silhouette of a woman. And I knew it was a woman because she was wearing what appeared to be a large hoop skirt dress, typical fashion from the time period. I still have these pictures somewhere, and will try to find them and post them. Finally, and most recently, I was dating a guy who lived in Staten Island. His parents had a townhome there. Apparently, the land it was built on was used as a gravesite or burial site. He warned me that he thought the place was haunted. Walking in, nothing felt weird, nothing felt off. It was a newer home, so there were no creaky noises or anything out of the ordinary. We went to sleep that night, and the central air was kicking on and off. I was sound asleep, not dreaming, but I was startled awake by this heavy, dark figure screaming in my face. I opened my eyes, and there was nothing there. I woke him up, and he nonchalantly said, Yeah, that happens. As if it was the norm. Through all those experiences, I'm a believer. I think it's extremely interesting, and I love ghost hunting, so to speak. I just like to try and find some evidence to show people. Story 17. This happened about 10 years ago. My ex is a carpenter, and I went with him to one of his jobs in Brookfield, Connecticut. He was helping to convert a 200-year-old barn into a modern house. They had taken it apart and used the old beams in the new kitchen. He told me it was quite beautiful. So one autumn morning, I decided to go with him to see this house in person. Once we pulled up to the driveway on an autumn morning, instead of following him inside, I stayed in the truck to finish my crossword puzzle. Maybe 45 minutes had passed, and I heard him yell my name and to come inside. Begrudgingly, I put my crossword down, put on my jacket, and walked up the long driveway. Since the porch for the front door was incomplete, I had to enter the house through the 3-car garage. Once you step in, you see this massive kitchen with the beams in the ceiling. I stood there admiring it for about less than a minute and then crossed the kitchen to the grand entrance with the ornate stairs leading to the other floors of the house. As I stepped on the first few steps, I faintly heard footsteps behind me, as if a person was walking behind me about 10 feet away. I paused to look back, but there was nothing there and chalked it up to it being a new house. As I made my way up the first landing, it sounded like someone was maybe a foot away from me, but taking louder steps. I stopped again, and there was nothing. I stepped onto one stair to see what would happen, and this time there was no mistaking it. It was a step, but this time much louder. In absolute fear, I ran up the steps, and this thing pounded after me. It was as if it was angry and it wanted to hurt someone. I was screaming when I finally reached the 3rd floor, and I was running to the room where I heard my ex's miter saw whirring. When he saw me, he stopped the machine and held me. I told him that something chased me up the stairs and I started crying. Once I was done crying, he gave me some of his hot chocolate and asked me why I came up. He said he saw me in the truck down the driveway and he thought I looked too peaceful to bother me. I told him I came inside the house because he called my name. He looked at me in shock and told me he didn't. Then he directed me to the window and pointed to the truck down the driveway. He said even if he yelled as loud as he could, I wouldn't have been able to hear him because it was that far away. I looked and he was right. Something else yelled my name. Now I'm really scared, so I asked him to walk me back outside to the truck, and I stayed there until it was lunchtime and asked him to take me home. I never returned to that house. Story 18. I have had and heard many ghost stories all my life as Thai, but a recent story from one of my best friend is the scariest I have heard. Around a year ago, my best friend, I will call him D from now on, had to travel to the city near Bangkok to work. A night prior, he had to work late night, so he and the other 2 of his friends left Bangkok around midnight. D is so tired, so he laid asleep on the back seat and expected to wake up on arrival. But then he woke up somewhere because the wheel was stuck on something and totally stopped. The car won't move at all, so his friend, who was the driver, went down the car and checked it. Turned out a piece of truck tire was blocking the wheel. His friend was thinking nothing of it, removed it, and came back to the driver's seat and moved on. So now D was awakened. He started to observe the surrounding. It is a barely 2-lane dirt road without any streetlight. They went in deeper to the road and there are a lot of turns. After a while, the road started to get smaller to the point the banana tree on the side of the road started to hit both sides of the car. They kept on driving for so long and then the wheel was stuck again. His friend went down to check and saw the piece of truck tire block the wheel again. He removed it, got back in the car, but this time he was scared. The phone connection on their phones were lost, so the driver had to keep going. As the car moved, D was annoyed, and he is not scared of the ghost or any shit. So he pushed the mirror down and shouted, "If you won't stop, I will fucking curse you to hell," to the darkness. Right after his last word, they all heard a long, blood-curdling scream of a woman from out of nowhere directed to them. Now his driver started to lose it. The passenger started screaming, while D was shocked. The driver successfully made a U-turn and noped the fuck out of there. On the way back out, it was just the straight road, no turn at all, and it just took them like 5 minutes to get out to the community area with a lots of street food and convenience store. They called their friend who was at the destination. The place is just next to that dirt road entrance. When they arrived, Dee wanted to talk about it, but others refused to, so everybody just went to sleep. The next day after they finished their work, they came back to the house and met the house owner's mom. So she said the road they got in is right at the back of the house. Dee went to take a look and saw a small hut with a lot of jars on the other side of the fence. Turned out it is a witch doctor's house who had raised a lot of ghosts as servants. That evening, they just packed and headed back to Bangkok. 2 months later, the house owner texted Dee and said that the witch doctor came looking for him, asking the house owner for Dee's name and saying that she wanted to kill Dee because of what he shouted out of the window that night. The witch doctor, who had never met Dee, described Dee's appearance correctly. The house owner refused to tell her. But then the house owner sent him the video his sibling took while he was talking to the witch doctor. In the video, the house owner was standing there talking alone. No witch doctor, no one. The second time, the witch doctor came and asked him about Dee again. The house owner refused again. Then later, the hut burned down mysteriously to the ground, and the witch doctor was gone. I am not really a believer in ghosts, but I was still shaken after I heard this story. Story 19. Let me preface this by saying that while I believe there are things people experience that defy reason, I always try to find a rational explanation before immediately jumping to the conclusion that it is paranormal. That being said, there are times when I just haven't been able to find a logical explanation and am just left wondering. In any case, I'm 40. I'm gainfully employed, don't do drugs, and only drink on occasion. I have 3 kids, 10, 12, and 19. I've been married for 20 years, some of them good. In general, I believe myself to be a good person, never willfully harming anyone, and tending towards being cheerful. The earliest instance I can remember is being 6 or 7, calling for my mom because I was so thirsty. It was nighttime. I was in bed. I recall seeing my mom approach, arm extended with a glass of water. I sat up and reached for her, but my hand went right through her. I looked up at her, confused, and it wasn't my mom after all. It was another lady, and she sort of just dissolved as I started. We could chalk that up to me just being addled with sleep, moving right along. Same house, right around the same age. We had a large, extended family, and they were always coming over to visit. Aunts, uncles, cousins, friends. There always seemed to be a party going on. Noisy chatter, kids running amok. And in the midst of this, of course, was Tio Nico. Tio Nico would sit there and grin, taking in all the noise and revelry, winking at me every now and again. Then my dad was promoted, which meant more money, and he and my mom were finally able to afford moving us out of that tiny 1-bedroom house and buy our first home. Family and friends continued to come over to the new house, but after a while, I realized I hadn't seen Tio Nico in some time, so I asked my parents about him, and they had no idea who I was talking about. In fact, no one in the family knew. It bothered me for some time, then years later, 10 or more, my mom tells me she ran into our old landlady. They hadn't seen each other since we'd moved out, and since we'd always been good tenants, she was very happy to catch up with my mom. During the course of conversation, she asked my mom whether we'd ever experienced any unusual events at the house. My mom told her no. The landlady, I think her name was Mary, said she hadn't been able to keep tenants in that house since we'd moved. She said tenants complained of seeing an old man about the place. "You don't think they mean Don Nicholas, do you?" She asked my mom, apparently referring to a neighbor who had passed away in his sleep in the house next to the one we used to rent. My mom was so excited to tell me she had figured out who Tio Nico was. Only thing was, the guy had passed on when I was around 2, and so couldn't have been around when I claimed to have seen him hanging around with the family. But we can just chalk that up to coincidence, and who knows? Maybe some random old lurker had surreptitiously hung out with us, and no one but myself had noticed. So now we're on to the new family home, a 1950s, 1-story ranch style, 3-bed, 1-bath home. There was a detached garage and next to it a 2-bed, 1-bath guest house that we kids used to keep our toys and play school in. You could not stay in that guest house by yourself without feeling as if someone was watching you. The feeling was so intense that we would run out of there sometimes. My mom said we were silly, but even she wouldn't venture near it alone without one of us in tow or with my dad. At night, we could hear the sound of chains dragging across the concrete driveway. To date, my sister, who bought the house from my parents, says you can hear that sound. It was brought to her attention by my nieces. She flipped out about it because she remembered hearing that same sound when we were growing up in the house. My bedroom was the front room, and if I didn't close my door at night, something would walk in, stand by my bed, then walk across the room to the large, full-length mirror that was propped against the wall and knock on it. As soon as that happened, the feeling of a presence in the room was gone. I don't know or understand why a closed door would preclude this occurrence, but I soon learned it was the only way to keep it from happening. Once we woke once to the sound of our parents whispering worriedly. It was a strangely disquieting sound, to hear one's parents sound afraid. I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room and saw them standing by the big bay window, facing the front yard and the large oak tree. Our two dogs, a collie mix and lab mix, were sitting facing the tree, at attention it seemed. I asked what was going on and my parents shushed me, told me to go back to bed, but I couldn't. I wanted to know what Lady and Valor were up to. Every now and again, they'd turn their heads to look our way, but would then turn their attention back to the tree. I heard my mom ask my dad, "Can you still see him?" And my dad nodded and pointed. I looked, straining my eyes against the darkness, and realized that there was a man leaning against the tree, just on the other side of the fence. He was wearing a long coat and a hat, and I felt cold and terrified. Who was he and why was he out there? "Call 911, I hissed, but my dad just told me again to go to bed. Frustrated and frightened, I waited beside them and must have fallen asleep at some point. I woke up in my own room, remembering the night before, and wondering what the resolution had been. Somehow I forgot to ask. The day unfolded like any other, and the incident completely slipped my mind. Then that night, the whole thing repeated itself, and somewhere in the midst of it, I got the strangest sense of déjà vu. I insisted to my parents that this same thing had already happened the night before. I even told them about the man standing by the tree. They seemed worried. Before we could discuss it further, our dogs began to bark furiously. They hurled themselves at the fence, baring their teeth the whole bit. As we watched, the man who had been leaning against the tree seemed to grow and blend into the tree, into the darkness. The dogs stopped barking. They looked back towards us and then sauntered slowly to the porch. My dad brought them in. They were quivering. They seemed restless. It was unsettling. Over the course of the 12 or so years that I lived there, we all experienced strange things. My dad worked second shift, 3 to 12:30 during the week, and my mom would do a fair amount of housework in the middle of the night and wait up for him to get home. She said she always felt watched or as if someone were standing behind her. Pictures would fall off walls. This happened once at Thanksgiving with several family members present. Anyway, I've droned on and on. I've got so many other experiences to relate, but it's 2:30 a.m. and I'm getting sleepy. Good night. Story 20. My family and I had many paranormal experiences in our home, and even guests who stayed over experienced some of them. When I was in the 5th grade, my family moved to a military base in Germany. We moved into a house that seemed normal at first, but soon strange things started happening. One day after school, I walked home alone and opened the front door. All the doors visible from the front door, 4 in total, began slamming open and close repeatedly. Scared, I waited outside for my brother to come home. My brother and his friend didn't believe me and went inside while I waited. A minute later, they came running back out, saying they saw the same thing with the doors and heard yelling from the basement. They left me alone outside while they went to a recreation center. I waited for my dad to get home from work, but eventually I thought he was taking too long and decided to run inside the house. Surprisingly, all the paranormal activity stopped as soon as I entered. My dad also experienced a dark figure of a man walking down the hallway and around the basement. He told us that when we were away in the US for the summer, he saw the figure open doors and go into rooms. One story he shared was about being in the basement, which included another hallway, 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom. He was doing laundry and kept our bedroom doors closed when he suddenly heard a door open. He looked down the hallway and saw someone walk into my bedroom. He checked but didn't see anyone, but he told us it was really creepy and became a believer after a few similar experiences. Many friends who stayed over also saw the black figure of a man walking around and witnessed doors randomly opening or closing. I eventually had to move to a bedroom upstairs because the downstairs occurrences made me uncomfortable. I have many more stories of strange things that happened in that house, but I don't want to overwhelm you with them. I lived in that house for 5 years and enjoyed most of my time there, except for the occasional ghostly activity. Story 21. I had some weird experiences about a dozen years ago when I was a little child. They all happened in the same apartment and revolved around the same object. Since it was a long time ago and I was so young, I only remember a few things. But these things are vivid in my memory. I used to live in a small 2-bedroom apartment with my mom, then stepdad, and older brother. The main thing that started all the bad stuff was a framed object we hung up on the wall over our fireplace. It wasn't a painting, but rather a model of a golden dragon with red gems for eyes over a red cloth background. My mom was into Asian decor, so she brought it home one day. My dad worked a graveyard shift, so when he would leave, I would always go and sleep with my mom. I remember always stopping in the dark hallway to look into the living room and stare at the dragon for at least a few seconds every night. One thing I remember is that I usually waited for my dad to leave before going to sleep next to my mom, but one night I got out of bed clutching a stuffed bear to my chest and stood right outside my bedroom door, looking across the hall to my parents' room before my dad left for work. Our rooms were at the ends of the hall across from each other. My dad went out of the room, saw me, and told me to go to bed. I think I just stayed there, and he went to leave, but I followed him out of the hallway to the front door. The thing I remember most out of this incident was him turning around to see me there, still holding the teddy bear to my chest and raising his voice telling my mom to come put me to bed. Another thing I remember is that one day, my parents bought this alarm that sticks to the sliding glass door leading to the patio. If the door opens, 2 pieces would separate and make a loud alarm go off. A few days after they installed it, we all woke up at night to the alarm. I remember my mom running to our room, holding a stiletto and closing the door, while my dad went to the living room to check it out. I don't remember much of what happened after that, but I remember my mom telling me that my dad swung one of our large plants in the dining room, causing a large mess, then just walked back to their room to go back to sleep. Turns out the alarm had just fallen off the door, causing it to go off. The alarm went off a few more times over a couple more nights before my parents threw it out. I also remember this time where I was in my parents' room at night, laying in bed with my mom and my brother, watching a movie when I started to doze off. I remember seeing a massive black object in the shape of a spider above us on the ceiling. It was massive with multiple legs, but just a black silhouette. I yelled out, "Tarantula," and pointed at the ceiling, but it immediately disappeared. My mom and brother just said I was seeing things and to watch the movie. Things between my mom and stepdad started to get toxic around this time. They would start to yell and argue with each other pretty much every day, and my dad started being cold to my brother and me. The last things I remember all happened in the same day. One day my dad was out during the day and a woman showed up. Turns out it was a relative of my mom's from the Philippines, who she had called and told her about the things that were going on. Mostly about my dad. She flew from the Philippines all the way to America to see us in person. I remember walking around the apartment with the relative, spraying water with a spray bottle into all the rooms and holding a candle. I also remember standing in the dining room next to my brother while the relative was standing in front of my mom, who was sitting in a chair. I don't know what they were saying because they were speaking Tagalog, and I don't know the language, but I do remember seeing my mom just straight up pass out. Her eyes rolled back and showed nothing but white. I also remember my brother being scared as hell, holding the house phone in his hand with 911 dialed in, ready to call. The relative ended up pointing out the dragon statue, painting, whatever it was called. When my dad got home, my mom told him to take that dragon thing off the wall and put it by the dumpster with the dragon facing the dumpster. Not just toss it in or anything. I don't remember anything weird after that, which is actually really creepy when I think about it. My mom and stepdad ended up divorcing about a year later. Their relationship never got out of being toxic, even after we moved out of the apartment and into a house. Sometimes I wonder if whatever the hell happened in the apartment had something to do with their relationship going to shit. I love that dude. My earliest memories of a father were of him, not my real father. Story 22. As long as I can remember, I've always believed in certain aspects of the paranormal, but I generally write off 95% of people's stories and experiences as paranoia, natural phenomena, or just wanting to believe something paranormal happened to them. I'm a skeptical believer. Until about 13 years ago, I had never had any experiences I couldn't find a rational explanation for. A house that I used to rent and later bought and rented out had some odd happenings. There were times where I would, for lack of a better term, feel like I was having a panic or anxiety attack. It was always accompanied by a feeling of paranoia, like being watched, regardless if anyone else was around. It would last about 30 seconds or so, then it would be gone. I never mentioned it, but then one day my wife told me about having the same experience. Another odd thing about that house was animals refused to go into the bathroom. When sitting with my dad's dog, he would lay down at the bathroom door and just stare. I tried taking our cat in there a couple times, and he would start scratching and clawing at my arms and immediately jump down and run out of the bathroom. We recently sold the house, but when talking to a previous renter of mine, they told me they wanted to offer to buy the house from me, but they never felt comfortable there. It was part of the reason they moved. Other than a few friends, I never told anyone of the experiences we had there. It wasn't until we bought the house we live in now that I truly began to have unexplainable things happen, rather than just feelings of paranoia and weird animal behavior. One morning, the wife and I were cuddled on the couch watching TV. Next to our TV was a rocking chair. Out of nowhere, the chair tilted forward, stayed there for a second or so, then rocked back and forth a couple times before stopping. It looked exactly like someone had been sitting there, leaned forward, and stood up. I thought I was imagining things until I looked at my wife, and she was staring at the chair too. She saw the exact same thing. I tried to recreate the situation, but there was no way I could make that chair do anything like that again. Shortly after that, the voices began, almost always in my son's room. I heard a female voice in there once. My wife had heard it, and later my brother, without any prior knowledge of what was going on, told me he heard a female voice in there as well. There had also been some other odd occurrences, but nothing that I couldn't rationalize away. Strange noises and the like. There was one time while I was home alone and in the basement that I heard footsteps walking across the floor above me. I ran upstairs and checked it out, but there was no one else there. This all happened over the course of about 9 months or so. We never felt uncomfortable here, never threatened in any way. We even named our guest Molly. Eventually, we had a paranormal team come and investigate. They had some personal experiences, heard a voice in my son's room, and recorded an EVP, although nobody could really tell what it was saying. The strange thing is that ever since the paranormal group was here, everything just stopped. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.